that is how to improve the integration of electronic medical records with clinical trials. We've simply titled this presentation, Why Not Make Clinical Trials More Efficient? To go with the theme of looking at practical ways to better the effectiveness and accuracy of clinical trials while addressing the needs of sponsors and patients alike. My name is Jason Brown. I lead the marketing efforts here at Adaptive Clinical, and we also have with us Mitch Collins, who recently joined Adaptive as Chief Revenue Officer. Today's webinar is the third in a series of webinars on clinical trial interoperability. We're pleased to have with us today Dr. Rumi Nusrat, a practicing physician scientist. Rumi's career includes training at Rockefeller University as an immunologist and cell biologist under Zhanvir Khan and Ralph Steinman, both Nobel Prize winners. Rumi brings a from-the-trenches perspective, having contributed to several successful clinical trial programs. He's held faculty roles at Brigham University and serves as professor of clinical medicine at Rutgers University. He's been featured in several publications, including the Journal of Clinical Investigation, the Journal of Experimental Medicine, and the New England Journal of Medicine. Again, we're very pleased to have him with us. Also presenting today, we have Sina Adibi, CEO and founder of Adaptive Clinical Systems. Sina's experience has included leadership roles at ParExcel, Thomson Scientific, and SunGard. He took his experience and applied it towards building clinical trial technology solutions, some of which you'll hear today. And Sina now serves on the board of Artesia, a custom software development company, and is an active member of the Software and Information Industry Association, the Greater Philadelphia Executive Group, and the National Federation of Advanced Information Services. With that, before we begin, I did want to explain to everyone that we have you on mute to avoid background noises. If at any time you have a question or comment, you can enter that into the chat window here at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll try to address that at the end of the webinar. If we're running short on time, we'll reach out to you personally to answer your inquiry or offer an additional help. So without further ado, our agenda. Today, Rumi will start us off with some perspectives on why electronic medical record systems should integrate with CTMS and EDC, challenges in realizing that integration, the features that support EMR function, and then conclude with a benefit and a picture of the future of EMR and CTMS EDC integration. Sina will then offer some history on the FDA's position on interoperability, challenges in interoperability and what that means, gives an overview of the adaptive eClinical bus approach, and then presents some case studies in interoperability. So let's get started. Without further ado, I'd like to present Rumi. Take over the presentation.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar. The national vision for less costly and efficient clinical research is what today's webinar is about. Have you wondered why we cannot combine the standard efficiency of CDISC style standards with the clunky, unstructured data in electronic clinical records and better serve our customers, and in this case, the patients? Both the EDC and EMRs are about improving patient care and are both very safe with respect to privacy when applied correctly. Yet, they are separate like the Earth and the Moon. Do you know of a sick family member who has to go from one EMR system to another as a patient and has the misery of taking details of medical records as paper copies? If you're very sick, you may need a wheelbarrow for your paper and electronic copies. If you're doing research to the standards that the FDA expects, to date, we have no efficient way to take data from the unstructured EMR and apply CDISC style organization to it. EMRs contain relatively loosely defined disease definitions and outcomes. Clinical research protocols organized for regulatory review have highly defined protocol-based disease definitions and clinical outcomes, with data organized to adhere to CDISC standards. The interface between EMRs and EDCs are primitive. To verify source documents in the EMR, either certified paper copies of EMR documents or a live clinical research associate is used to verify that what occurred in patient care is indeed the source for what is in the EDC. This practice appears primitive in the age where internet standards permit banking, sharing of confidential information with our government, and payments for a taxi ride from our mobile phone. The scope of the problem with two distinct administrative, legal, financial, and data systems is huge. EMRs and EDCs live in different universes. Yet, both the EMR and EDCs have the objective of providing us data for evidence-based medical practice. The national vision for less costly and efficient clinical research is what today's webinar is about. So the points are, research, be it for safety, cost control, pharmaceutical, or national research, needs to access electronic patient charts or the EMR. The administration of the research enterprise must be efficient. Good work, including good research, requires wise management of money. We need to separate research versus patient care billing and reimbursement. We need efficient data capture and monitoring. Therefore, we need efficient ways to identify source documents and EMRs up front. If we know what the key source documents are up front, risk-based management is simplified and becomes an acceptable risk both for the sponsor and the FDA. Ultimately, we reduce cost per patient from the odd $15,000 to $50,000 a patient, depending on the complexity of the trial, to something that makes more common sense. So what are the challenges in the EMR to CTMS and EDC integration? First, data in EMRs is mostly unstructured, unlike EDCs. There is no structure and content agreement in, say, radiology and clinical data fields across institutions. The diagnostic and clinical outcome definitions in clinical practice, unlike structured clinical research, have too many unstructured combinations and permutations. Although we need a universally available ECRF system for studies intended for national health authorities, there are competitive, economic, and administrative barriers. As you will learn today, the barriers from EMR to EDC integration are slowly coming down. Progress in part is limited due to concern about patient data safety breaches. We need to integrate data, verify source documents from EDC, but also be compliant to two rigorous administrative protections, HIPAA and CFR 21 Part 11 controls. Clinical trial management systems in a certain way sit in the middle of EHRs and EDCs and offer some very customizable functions to help us. CTMS systems track patients, payments, invoicing for patient care versus research, very important to keep sort of the business of clinical medicine and research moving along with their different financial systems. The CTMS allows us to select and track source documents. It helps us organize monitoring reports and even conduct drug accountability documentation. And there are many, many other examples of what today's CTMSs can do to help us do quality work. So what are the benefits of EMR to EDC integration? When executed well, there is an improved bottom line for both organizations and patient care. That is, efficient budgeting, compliance, and payments. Enhance data integrity and data monitoring, time and cost saving. And what is most important, there is more time for interaction with patients and study volunteers. After all, would you agree that patients and study volunteers is what our work is ultimately about? So if that is true, what is the future of EMR and EDC integration? Some of you may be amazing experts on these topics, and maybe that's the reason why you've taken the time to attend today's webinar. The terminology on this slide is, in short, what the technical terms that will become more commonly understood by us, because it is indicating that in the next few years, internet standards that are the center of interoperability will slowly arrive to EMR and EDC systems. Sina will tell you more about this with use cases in a few minutes. Because of the many challenges between where we are and where we need to be with our electronic data systems, I will conclude with a source of inspiration. The quotation is by the brother of John F. Kennedy. Robert Kennedy also ably served as the Attorney General of our country during very turbulent times, and so I will borrow his words. There are those who look at things the way they are, that is, the EMR and the EDC do not integrate, and ask why. We should dream of things that never were and ask why not. So together we will make the marriage between EMR and EDC systems possible. With that, I will ask Sina to continue.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rumi. You heard a very compelling argument for the integration of EMRs and EDC from a practicing and very experienced investigator. As Jason said from the beginning, Rumi gave us a really good view from the trenches on why this has to be done. And as you all know, FDA plays a very important role in everything that we do when it comes to clinical trials conduct. And the good news is that the FDA was listening and has been listening and clearly is motivated to implement some of the things that have to be done here in order for us to successfully integrate EMRs with EDCs. As we all know, this is something that transcends just simple system-to-system communication. This is something that has to be managed in a compliant fashion. So it's rightful that FDA took a position on this. In 2013, they recognized the importance of eSource, and they came up with a guidance after speaking to a number of stakeholders on the electronic source data in clinical investigations. By the way, I will be referencing a couple of different FDA publications, and Mitch Collins will be more than happy to send you the originals of these documents or links to them. They're public information, but we didn't include them here, but summarize them. So if you want to read them and you haven't heard about them, feel free to reach out to Mitch and he'll be happy to do that. But clearly when FDA was looking at eSource, they were looking to improve the reliability, quality, traceability, and integrity of data. And what they felt compelled to do was to offer us, the industry, the parameters under which we could operate. The guidelines, though, were not without provisos. Clearly, we have to operate within the framework. So here's a summary of some of the most important parts. One is that the role of the PI is very important here, and they will need to generate and maintain their own right-protected copies of these ECRFs for each study. The second bullet is really important, and it again is a testament to going beyond systems. It's a procedures for selecting the data elements. Rumi talked about the difference in EMRs being unstructured data to some extent, and EDC and ECRFs being very much structured. So what we're being told here is we need to have planned guidelines that are written up and predefined before we put pen to paper, so to speak, and have our systems begin to talk to each other. Obviously, list of the originators, whether it's persons or devices and instruments, must be maintained at each site. Again, this is information such as calibration of the instruments, and with the advent of med device studies, med devices are generating reams and reams of raw data, and the origins of each one of these data elements, if they end up in the CRF, need to be traced. And finally, the impact of clinical trial guidance in this case is pretty substantial for the sites, as well as implications for CRAs, data managers, and technology vendors. But it is a huge step in the right direction. Okay. The FDA again took a position in 2015, or actually June of 2015 to be exact. So this is a very recent event, and there is a number of working groups that were triggered as a result of this inquiry, is the best that I can describe it. And really it's an invitation by the FDA for a demonstration and evaluation. And if you read their opening remarks, they're looking for a demonstration project so that they can assess and report the value and the challenges. So even the FDA recognizes that this is something that is a lot easier said than done. So rather than forge ahead into issuing a set of guidelines, they are doing what every researcher is doing. They're collecting data and they are reaching out to industry. And a number of major vendors, the usual names that you would know in the eClinical space, including ourselves, are, sorry about that. Okay, that's better. Really, the purpose of this is, as they justified it, and again, the communique is available for you if you reach out to Mitch, is to eliminate duplication of data by capturing and transmitting it directly from the EMR EHRs, to reduce transcription errors and improve the quality of data. So this is obviously very intuitive. If you don't have to print out the paper, you don't have to do the source data verification step, so that saves you time and money. But again, intuitively, if you don't have intermediaries who are taking data from one place and typing it into a different system, you reduce transcription errors. moving data capture to point of care is obviously very important here, and remote monitoring of data so that we reduce the number of on-site visits. And I'll touch on a little bit on risk-based monitoring later, which is something that the industry is really focused on these days. So what are some of the challenges in interoperability? One of the things that I want to do here is I want to pause for a minute and describe the difference between interoperability and data integration. Data integration is something that we have been doing as an industry for many, many years. Just about everybody on this call, I'm sure at some point, had extracted data from one system in a comma delimited format, took it into Excel, massaged it, cleaned it up, and then loaded it into a different system. That's integration. That basically means we're moving data from point A to point B. Now, making that very fluid, making that bidirectional, and making that real time is really important. However, what is interoperability is when you actually introduce a layer of intelligence to the data transfer. And this layer of intelligence is things where you may take multiple data points and combine them into a derivation. Maybe even you can scan certain data elements over time and conclude derivations. And that is something that's also very important. But in terms of the most simplistic approach, when you're thinking about the data going from point A to point B, we have found that it's very important for it to be bidirectional. In other words, you don't want it just to go one way. You want the data to be able to come back because there are many workflow steps that include that. And then it has to be real time. The day and age where we used to tell our sponsors, if we were CROs, come back in 2 weeks and I'll get you a data dump, are over. Everyone needs to have access to the data and the snapshots of the data in real time, and the data has to be up to date. However, having the EDCs are not the end point. The data transitions through the EDC and it ends up in the analytic tool. So having the ability to still do what we used to, which was output data in CDISC or HL7 or SAS format, and now with the advent of new analytic tools such as Spotfire from TIBCO, the ability to export the data in a fluid fashion still remains, and that has to be honored. Now, standards play a big role here because clearly how the data comes out and how that's loaded is still a challenge. The second bullet is the data transformation that I was talking about. There really needs to be intelligence in the vehicle that's moving data from point A to point B so that it can act on it. Now, so disease state derivations, as an example, is something that requires the data to be scanned over the course of many time points for you to calculate perhaps the deviations, to find the nadir and so on, and then be able to, based on those percentages and based on input from the clinical side of the shop, to be able to determine the derivations. So codifying that clinical practice or know-how is going to introduce two things. One is obviously it's going to make it consistent. In other words, if you have two different clinicians looking at the data, you could conceivably have two different conclusions drawn because of variations in training, because of variations in background, and so on. And that's a challenge. And of course, there's adjudication, and there's many different steps we include to address that. But in a situation where you have codified it and it's an algorithm, then it's consistent, it's easily presentable to an auditor, and it's defensible. And in risk-based monitoring policies, that is something that has a voracious appetite for data. However, it's not just simply looking at data. It's something where you have to crunch the data. You have to look at deviations. You have to look at statistics, background, history of sites, and so forth, so that you can selectively send your monitors to the sites that need to be looked at. So again, having that intelligence in between is really important. Of course, as I mentioned earlier under FDA, that's the omnipresent. Rumi put it really well in that this is the confluence of two different universes, or I believe he said the sun and the moon. HIPAA and FDA CFR 21 Part 11 are both two different sets. They are two different approaches for the same end. However, they are nonetheless different set of criteria, and a system that is effectively tying EMRs in with EDC, for example, needs to be cognizant of both of those. And it's very, very important, obviously, because you can't fail one at the expense of the other. And then moreover, when you introduce multiple different systems in the course of a study conduct, according to the biotech handbook, there is, by one estimation, 26 different systems come into play and actually touch the data during the course of a clinical trial. And these 26 systems, by and large, don't talk to each other. So these systems need to be compliant, they need to always be validated, and they need to talk to each other. And the challenge is, what happens when one of them changes? Does that invalidate the entire ecosystem? And if it does, we will be forever validating our whole system, and that is very time-consuming and costly. Which brings me to the next bullet. We are all looking for efficiencies. We're looking at savings in terms of dollar cost as well as time. So this solution that we come up with has to be inexpensive to operate. It really can't be something that costs millions and millions for us to implement, takes years for us to implement and roll out. And the duration of our studies vary. If we're doing a short-term phase 1 study of several months, or if we're doing a really comprehensive phase 3 study over the course of 3 years, this should be something that just stretches with the duration that we needed. And finally, it needs to be a solution that's scalable. As I mentioned, with the advent of medical devices, the volume of data that's generated has increased exponentially. So much so that a lot of these med devices actually have their own portals to filter the data. Well, then by virtue of filtering it, we're prohibiting some of valuable data to come out. So if we had a scalable solution, we'd be able to import all of that. Based on these experiences that we've had, the things that need to be taken into account in the design of such a system that acts as the go-between or the glue is one, in that it has to be architected in such a fashion that it can easily work with all the most popular vendors out there. For example, Bioclinica has a very popular EDC, CTMS, among other tools there. It's a powerhouse of eClinical tools. There are a number of other major vendors out there that we all know. Well, a system like this has to be able to work with all of those so that we have the option of having our study use the best-in-breed tools. The EMR EHRs, there's some 700 or so EMRs out there. True, there are one or two very large ones such as Epic, but when you are drilling down into smaller practices where your subjects may be, and we're always keen to find the right subjects for our study, the EMRs become more, or rather less mainstream. So this solution needs to have the connectivity or the connectors to be able to work with those. Same with the EDC and the analytics I touched on. There are like about 4 or 5 major analytics vendors out there for the last 4 or 5 years, I would say. Spotfire is one by one account. They have some 60% of the market in pharma. So this has to be something that not only works with the big players, but it works with all the other tools. And as I mentioned, we can't forget about SPSS and SAS. Those are our staple statistical analysis tools. We all probably have more skills in those tools, I call them traditional tools, than we do in the newer tools. So this system needs to be able to feed data into those in the same way. Now, medical imaging, as many of you know, has emerged as a big source of data for an evaluation for mostly oncology studies, and those systems used to be islands unto themselves, and really the only way of getting the data out of them was to literally print it out and get perhaps interns or CRAs to retype the data in, and we talked about the challenges there. And finally, all of the lab instrumentation, the EEG machines, the EKG machines are all smart now. They all have interfaces. They all are capable of directly loading and feeding their data in. What I'd like to do now is take a few minutes and show you a couple of case studies that we have. The very first one that I'm going to show you is an EMR to EDC integration. For the EMR, we're using Point-Click Care. Point-Click Care is a very popular EMR that is in use in probably 80% of senior care facilities. It's specialized for that purpose, and that's why it's been very popular there. And of course, Medidata is another vendor that produces that has a very popular EDC here. This is training data, is what I'm about to show you. But just to be safe, we have blurred out the sensitive information. So if you see the blurring out, it's not that the information is out of focus. So as a CRO, let's say if there are CROs among us, one of the challenges is when a sponsor asks us to use Medidata, we always worry about, do we have the training necessary for that? So the solution that we have, I'm going to pause it for a second, allows you to use the tool in its native format. So as I mentioned, the major vendors and eClinical vendors, they have spent many years developing intuitive interfaces. So this solution for interoperability should not in any way affect that or negate the work they have done. So this is standard metadata interface that you see. This is the subject view, so you can see the number of subjects there. And we're going to go over on this side and open up a record on the EMR. This is Point-Click Care, the EMR interface. Again, this is centered towards provision of care. And what the interoperability platform has done is it has injected a field here, if you can see my mouse, and it's highlighted. And this field is basically, if you will, the patient registry that ties the EMR information and records in with the EDCs in this one particular case. This is a very simple example that we put together because it's easy to demonstrate and show. And what it's highlighting here is that this subject is test 120, and we're going to go over to metadata. We're going to see test 120, and we're going to go and look at the CRFs. These are the different CRFs. We just opened the screening CRF. For those of you who are accustomed to using metadata, this should be pretty standard. And here it is. The vital signs CRF has information that was collected at the last patient visit. and that information came directly from the EMR, and we're going to go to the EMR and we're going to open up that record, and here is most recent vitals. Now, a couple of things that can be done, again, in the context of the data transformation. I'm going to sort of pause this for 1 second just to make a point. Okay, I missed that point. However, the thing is that there are some calculations such as body mass index or body surface area. These can be algorithms that vary, sometimes by site, sometimes by training. The tool can actually apply the algorithm from the sites depending on whatever clinical rules that were put in place. So that's something that, again, is going to save a lot of time for the clinical data management folks when they have to deal with this sort of stuff. Here we're looking at the medication list for this one particular subject, and they had milk of magnesia, 30 cc's, and if we go over to the CRF and we go to, there it is, treatment list, we see that. Now, again, an example of something that is very important. You know, as the patient goes in for normal visits with their doctor, and the doctor prescribes something seemingly innocuous to them, it's something that might be very important to the EDC. And again, it's something that you really don't want to have to train every physician that's out there who might come into contact with the subject. But here there's a important piece of information, and as you can see, the date of the prescription and the time and all of that good stuff is also very important, and it carries over. The next example that we're going to show is just a simple patient enrollment. The scenario here is, imagine you go to a practice or to a hospital site, and you have your inclusion exclusion criteria, and they go into their EMR and they do a search, and they look to see who are the subjects that they have, or patients rather, that they have that might fit that criteria. So in that scenario, they have chosen one subject, and this one subject is now going to be called test 140. And now we're going to go over to the EDC side, and as you can see, test 140 is currently not enrolled on the EDC side. This person was just identified on the EMR as a potential candidate. And what we're now going to do is we're going to actually add that magic tieback record that I mentioned to you. And basically this is saying that this is a subject for site adaptive, it's a subject, and that their name anonymized should be test 140. And then when you save it, we're going to go on the other side, and the record is going to be there. It's going to carry over all the pertinent information. Again, the rules engine should dictate what fields should get mapped over. The rules engine should dictate how they should be mapped over, and the rules engine will dictate whether any transformations are in order. We actually have another demo that demonstrates converting units of measure as a whimsical example, something that oftentimes people have to allow for both fields in a CRF, and it clutters things up. This way you can keep it clean and have units of measure show up one way on one side and another way on another side. So here we are looking at the vital signs for this subject, and we're going to go over and look at the information that's coming from that side. And here is the information. Okay. Now, in this, we're just going to go on and just show a little bit more that this person actually didn't have any treatments, but we demonstrated that last time. So let me stop this. By the way, as Jason said, please feel free to write down any questions that you may have. And if we have time at the very end, Rumi or I'd be happy to answer any of your questions that may be coming up. So let me stop this, and we can now move off of here. The next case study that we have is one on what do you do with the data once it's in the analytics tool. And our platform happens to have a fairly rich EDC system within it, and this is what we used for our example, but know that this EDC can be anything. It could be metadata, it could be anyone from any other major vendor such as Bioclinica. And in this model, one of the biggest challenges with analytics, as your IT will tell you, is not getting the software, but figuring out how to get the data into the new analytics tool. This is something that oftentimes takes probably just as long to scrub the data and get it sorted out and prepped than it is to actually set up the analysis. And what we're showing here is if we do the interoperability right and use the right tool, how easy this can be. So this is data imagined that was captured, came in from the EMR, went into the EDC, the study went on, and a whole bunch of information was captured there. And if you remember, what we did was we were actually recruiting subjects, enrolling subjects from sites. So what we're doing here is we're saying simply that we want study information, and then we're going to also say we want subject information. And then at this point, both subsets of the data, which is all we want to visualize here, have carried over. Again, this is a standard interface for Spotfire, so if this is something that you have folks that understand Spotfire and have been trained in it or have been using it for a long time, they don't have to learn anything new. Another thing that's important about interoperability that I'd like to state is this particular example, Spotfire is a desktop tool. So restricting interoperability to only systems that are web aware or web-based is going to leave a whole bunch of the tools that we're accustomed to using out in the field. So it's important for the interoperability to extend with their connectors to desktop tools that are not necessarily only web-based. So here again, clearly all of these features are standard features, and it's showing on one axis is the name of the sites, and then the other axis is the number of subjects that were enrolled. So there is one on each site, and then two on the yellow and the brown one that you saw. You can now, using Spotfire's capabilities, you can depict the information in whatever form that you would like. So here's simple bar charts. Now you can move on to different frameworks. Again, this is test data, so hopefully no one's study is running this slow, but this is just some sample stuff. If it was real data and it was your real study data from your EDC, it would obviously show the right information for you there. And now you can, interject the different fields, because we're looking in the enrollment, and we're looking by age, we're looking at it by gender. And here's like a scattergram. Different ways of looking at the data. It's really subjective at this point. A number of tools out there in the market. Tableau is one. Spotfire, as I said, is probably a very, very popular one. QlikView also had a version for pharma, and they still do to a lesser extent than Spotfire. But moral of the story here is that ultimately the EDC is not the endpoint. We want to be able to get the data out. We want to be able to present it. We want to be able to do things with it. And then we want to be able to go back and potentially put some data back maybe into the CTMS, maybe based on what we see here. Maybe what we want to do is we want to go back to the CTMS and identify the high-performing sites. You know, CTMSs generally deal with the financial side. That's one of the biggest roles they play. So you want to feed this information back, and here's a pie chart version of the same thing. At this point, what I'm going to do is we're getting pretty close to the end. I want to see if we have any questions here. I'm going to pause this demo and go back to the slide deck. And this is the information on how to reach out to Rumi. He's got a very interesting blog post there. I encourage you all to go to his website and read the blogs. In terms of those FDA publications, or if you want copies of this slide deck or any of these demos, or if you'd like to see them again with the narrative, Mitch would be more than happy to set up a time for us to discuss this, and then